Hello students and welcome to the second video in the IA series. In this video we're going to be focusing on how to choose your research question for your IA. So in the first video we did a brief introduction to the IA. So this is the second video and the next one we'll be doing the supporting documents, etc, etc. So like I said, the focus of this one is some pointers and some help on how to choose your research question. Note, there are so many possible research questions out there, so it's difficult to give you a definitive list, but we're going to try and come up with a bit of a framework for choosing a question. So some pointers, I said this in the first video, but obviously it needs to be about a real life business. And it literally can be any business. It can be a large business or a small business, anything you want to do. What I would say is, if it's a publicly held business, it's probably going to be easier to find supporting documents and sources. And the reason for that is that publicly held companies legally have to publish annual reports, including their finances, etc. So if the business is private or it's a sole trader or a partnership, yes, it's possible to find documents, but it's going to be a bit more challenging. So I'd be tempted if it was me to do a publicly held business. It doesn't mean you have to, but I think it probably does make your life a bit easier. It needs to be about a current issue the business is facing. And one of the rules of the supporting documents, which is the next video, but you need to choose sources and supporting documents, is that they need to be within the last 3 years, and that's from the date of submission of the IA itself. The IA can be forward-looking or backward-looking. A forward-looking question would be something in the future that hasn't happened yet. So maybe the business is thinking about making a decision, so you could evaluate that. One of the dangers of that is it becomes a bit hypothetical. So you want to come up with an idea that the business is actually thinking of doing rather than something you think that they could do. And then it's going to be a lot more realistic. Backward looking means that the business has already made the decision, and then you're going to evaluate whether it's gone well or badly for that business. So you want to be able to find sources to help answer your question. Like I said, you need to come up with 5 supporting documents. You can use primary research or secondary research. So secondary research is news articles, annual reports, Statista, government publications, etc. Primary research is when you go to the business and you conduct surveys, interviews, or you stand on the street outside the shop and you count how many people go past or things like that. I think in general, secondary research is easier because it's already been collected, it's already out there. But if you know a business, then you can go and do primary research. If it were me, like I said, I'd probably do a publicly held business and focus on secondary research. But you could, in theory, go and do primary research. You need to be able to find business management tools and theories related to the syllabus. So like I said, you need to use part of the syllabus, what you've learned in the course, and apply that in the IA. And I think one thing you could do is put part of the syllabus into the research question. So let's say, for example, you really like franchises. So when you learn about franchises, you find that quite interesting. On a personal note, I find the franchises quite interesting. So what you could do is you could again find a current issue around franchising that is in the news at the moment, or some businesses may be thinking about doing a franchise model. And then you could put that into the research question. So should this business continue to develop their franchise idea or something like that? There's also a video coming later about what tools and theories to put into your IA. So there'll be a lot more about this coming forward. It needs to be answerable in 1,800 words. It's actually less because you need to write an introduction and conclusion. So you've probably got like 1,500 words to actually answer the question. 1,500 words might sound like a lot, but it really isn't. There's really not that many words there. And so you really, really want to have a question which is very focused. And so you can answer it in 1,800 words. It allows evaluation. What we mean by that is that the answers should not be obvious. So ideally, you've got a question where you can see the pros of the question or the pros of the strategy being used and also the cons of it. So whatever question you're coming up with, you can see both pros and cons of whatever thing you're evaluating, and therefore you can identify arguments on both sides. So if your question was something like, has the iPhone been successful for Apple? Well, the answer is pretty obvious. It's been very successful for them. So it probably wouldn't work because it's difficult to find arguments why it's not been successful. And so you want to come up with something like that. And it can use a concept. One of the concepts we talked about in the previous video: change, creativity, ethics, and sustainability. So here's my checklist. And so I've kind of summarized those things. Let's move my head. I've summarized all of that into 7 bullet points. I mean, this is not perfect. There are other things we need to consider, but I think these are the main things. So when you're coming up with research questions, you could, go through these 7 things, and then you can decide whether it's a decent research question or not. So here's some examples. So what strategies led Netflix to become a market leader, in the streaming market? Now you can see it satisfies 6 of those criteria, in my opinion, but I don't think this is answerable in 1,800 words. This is such a big question. There's so much to talk about that you'd want to narrow this down. So you could talk about a specific country, or you could talk about one specific strategy that they used and say whether it was successful or not. So this is a potential question, but it would need to be made more specific in that way. So second question is, to what extent has franchised helped Starbucks grow globally? Again, I think it satisfies most of the criteria, but this would be, I think, a pretty poor question. And it's the same as the iPhone one I gave earlier. I think the answer is pretty obvious. Starbucks has used a lot of franchises, and those franchises have led the business to grow. So I don't think there's any evaluation really to be used here. Because I think the answer is pretty obvious. But you could probably tweak the question to make it into a decent question, but obviously you need to change it. And my final example is, should Fruit Shop X, so this is a fruit shop somewhere, change their pricing method to cost plus pricing in order to gain market share in the town where they're located? Now, I think this is a good question. I mean, I think businesses will look at this, obviously. For an IA, I think there's challenges here. And firstly, I'd say that I think it is possible to do this question, but I think the biggest issue will be to find sources. Now, I think the obvious thing to do here would be to do primary research. So in order to do this question, you'd need to be able to go to this fruit shop. Maybe you go and interview the owners or the employees. You then might go and survey the customers. You then might go and look at the competition in the area. I think the problems with that is you'd need to then get the permission of the shop owner. And that's what HL students used to have to do in the old IA. But in the new IA, there's no requirements. I mean, you could go and do that, but remember, you need 5 supporting documents. So what are the other documents going to be here? Now, I think you probably could find some, but I think this question is possible if you can gain access to those sources, but I think it presents challenges. So again, like I said earlier, I'd be tempted to do a publicly held company. So some ways in which you can find your research question. Well, I've come up with 3 ways. I think the first one is just to follow the news. So go and look at lots of business news websites, follow the news consistently. So this is a question here. So a couple of years ago, I think IKEA came up with a strategy to open more urban stores. So this is an urban store on the high street. So normally IKEA stores are outside the town and they're really big, but they're coming up with an idea to do more ones on the high street. And so this was a news article a couple of years ago, and then you could use this. I mean, you probably couldn't use this now. I think it's a bit outdated, but this is one where you find a news article and then you use that for your IA. So I think that's the first way that you can find a topic for your IA. The second one might be you're interested in a specific company. So maybe you really like Nintendo, and then you go and find topics or issues that Nintendo are facing at the moment. Or it's another company that you like. You then go and do a search on the internet for them and you try and find an issue that they're facing. So I think that's something that you could do. Or you could choose a part of the syllabus. So let's say, for example, so this acquisition was a couple of years ago. Let's say you're really interested in mergers and acquisitions. So you really liked it when you studied mergers and acquisitions. And then you go and find an acquisition that's happening at the moment or within the last couple of years. And then you evaluate that acquisition. I talked about franchises earlier. Maybe you really like franchises. So again, you go and find a business that's, thinking of using franchise to grow, and then you could go and evaluate that. So I think that's 3 ways you could then go and use to find a research question. A lot of it really is just going and reading lots of news articles, finding out what's going on in the business world, which hopefully you do anyway. So from final thoughts, I think choosing a publicly held company makes it easier. Again, you don't have to. I just think it does make it easier. Putting part of the syllabus into the research questions, such as franchise acquisition, I think helps you in identifying BM tools and theories. We'll talk more about that later. Obviously, work with your teacher. Choose a business that interests you. And use a sentence stem that encourages evaluation. So in TOK and your IB studies, you've looked at these sentence stems. So to what extent is obviously a good TOK one, but you set up your question so that it allows evaluation. Yeah. Okay, that's the second video done. I'll see you next time.